far in our class, we've talked about perception, we've talked about culture, and we've talked about listening differences. And through those discussions, you've probably noticed that we do have a lot of differences. How do we even get along with each other with all these differences? Well, let's look at another difference in our verbal communication. Did you know in the English language we have over 1 million different words? We actually have around 1,150,000 words. Compare this to the French language. They have about 100,000 words. With all these different words that we have, we need to learn how to communicate better. We live in a time of technology, and sometimes we let the pictures do our discussion for us. For example, let's say you went to the beach, and if I ask you, how did your vacation go? Tell me a little bit about the beach. First thing we'll probably do is take out our phones and then start scrolling through our pictures and say, well, here's the beach, and here's our hotel room, and here's where we went to eat. We let the pictures do our work. But suppose I've never been to the beach, and I ask you to explain to me, what's the beach like? Only in words. How would you describe those words, those emotions, the feelings that you have whenever you see the ocean for the first time, or what hot sand on the beach feels like? This is the lost art. And if you recall back at the very beginning of the book, we had a chart, and the chart showed the communication table. And we had encoding and we had decoding. Well, today we're going to talk about encoding. How can we get our words across in a distinct manner? Well, let's look at some examples.
As you communicate, you use two major signal systems, the verbal and the nonverbal. Verbal messages are those sent with words. The word verbal refers to words, not necessarily orality. Verbal messages consist of both oral and written words, and verbal messages do not include laughter or pauses or words such as and ah, or responses you make to others that are oral but don't involve words, such as aha or ugh. These sounds are considered nonverbal, and something that we'll talk about in another chapter. The specific link between a word and the thing it symbolizes is not always clear. A person attributes the meaning of a word based on his or her experiences, and the meanings does not only reside within the word itself. One slogan that I think you need to memorize is this: meanings are in people, not in words. Let me repeat that. Meanings are in people, not in words. One way we can distinguish this is to look at two different types of meanings that we use in our vocabulary. They are denotative and connotative. The denotative meaning is the restrictive or literal definition of a word, whereas the connotative meaning is the personal and subjective association with the word. For example, the word mother is the denotative meaning would be, this is the person who gave birth to you. But the connotative meaning for mother would be a warm and a caring person who nurtured or loved you, or a cold and distant woman who always implied that you were not measuring up to her standards. Let's look at another example.
There's two types of meanings that we need to look at now: the denotative meaning and the connotative meaning. This is what we use in normal communication, and we use it as we tell stories. A good way to think of the denotative is think of the D as the dictionary term. And the connotative, this is the emotion behind that term. For example, if I use the word fall, and fall I don't mean to trip and fall down, but as one of the four seasons we call autumn. we could look up a dictionary term for autumn. It'd probably be something like this is one of the four seasons that comes right before winter. But the connotative reasoning behind it, this is the emotions behind that. This is the different colors of the leaves. Could be the smell of bonfires. It could be Halloween, football, when you hear the helmets start hitting each other. There's a crispness in the air. There are the apple cider, maybe hot chocolate. These are connotative terms. These are meanings that each person has. One person may have a negative connotative term or meaning for autumn because they say maybe they like summer, and they say summer's over, so autumn it's sad, everything's dying, and winter's behind it. Even though it's the same denotative term, the connotations are different. And this is where we try to get our point across, or at least we also, as decoding, we try to understand where the other people are coming from.
Another example is the word school. The denotative definition of school would just be a building where people learn. And maybe the picture that you have in your mind would be the school that you went to, grade school or junior high or high school. The thought that you have in your mind might look like this picture that you see on the screen. Yep, that looks like a school that we would see in any city in the United States. But what about this? This is a hut in a village in Africa, but it's a school. You see, the connotative idea behind school would be it's a place where there's learning. It doesn't matter if it's made out of bricks or mortar or has a nice lawn. The picture on the right is just as much of a school as the picture on the left. The denotative addresses both, but the connotative detail is different. Remember, it's the meaning or the emotion behind the word. Words can be confusing. Words are very cultural bound. There was some words that they used in the 1950s that we may laugh at now. And the words that we think are neat now, our kids and grandkids will probably laugh at, just like they'll laugh at our fashion. But other things that make the English language very difficult is what you see on the screen. The very first one you see is onomatopoeia. That is English words that sound like they're spelled. For example, crash, or bang, or zap, or glug glug. And then there's idioms. Idioms are words that, when put together, have a different meaning. I've given you some examples there, like if we say we want to ride shotgun, well, most of us know what that means. Or, yep, we're in the same page, or we're in the same boat now. We're pulling someone's leg. Can you imagine trying to explain idioms to someone that's just learning the English language? Then we have euphemisms. These are words that are kind of less offensive words. For example, besides saying an old person, we may say senior citizen. Or besides saying it's a used car, we may say pre-owned. Or they're an illegal alien, we might try to say undocumented worker. As silly as euphemisms are, they're used in the English language. And then there's redundant words. Redundant or redundancy are a word or two or three that mean the same thing. For the first one, look at that example. Exact same. We say that together, but exact means the same. Or you've seen this on a menu, tuna fish. Well, if it's a tuna, it's a fish. Or Jewish rabbi. You can't be a rabbi unless you're Jewish. Or you see ministers saying this at weddings. We're joined together. Well, you can't be joined apart. And then we have oxymorons. These are words, two or three, and it's really the opposite of redundancy. These are a word that means the opposite. Let's look at the menu again. We say jumbo shrimp. Well, how can something small be big? Or boneless ribs. Aren't ribs supposed to have bones in them? We say virtual reality or random order. These are words that maybe we take for granted because we've grown up listening to idioms and redundant expressions, and maybe we use this in our language, but not everybody does. So when we're explaining something, we need to make sure that we encode properly, that our message is being decoded properly as well. The way we enunciate our words, the way we pick and choose our words to the culture. And culture isn't just people from different countries. Culture is people from the north and people in the southern part of the United States. For example, if you go to a restaurant and you order a soft drink, well, soft drink could mean pop to some people, and down south it's usually called Coke. Whether it's Pepsi or Sprite, they call it most soft drinks Coke. Here in our region, we call it pop. People up north will maybe call it soda. So words are very cultural bound. Think of a hot dog. Do you put sauce on it or do you put chili on it? Well, that depends really if you're from the north or from the south. So not only are words cultural bound when it comes to decades, the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, but they're cultural bound here in the United States. Sometimes we use words differently in small cities than we do large cities, or in the holler, or in a large city up north. We have different dialects. People up north have a unique dialect. So we all have different ways that we use words, but we have to make sure that we encode and decode properly.
Also, whenever we're talking about verbal communication, I'd like to mention just briefly about giving speeches. Even though we're not giving speeches in this class, part of verbal communication is speech making. And many of you that are listening right now, whenever you graduate, part of your position may be giving presentations. You may not think so now, but if you're, for example, if you're a nurse, maybe you become department head and you have to give presentations. There's a lot of nurses that go to the different clubs that I've mentioned before, the civic groups, the Kiwanis, the Rotary, the Lions Club, and they have to give presentations. Maybe it's on heart health or diabetes education. So just a few little pointers that I'd like to give you with verbal communication. Number one, if you're using a PowerPoint, remember that PowerPoint is only an aid. You don't want to read every single word of that PowerPoint. Number one, that's boring for the audience, and they could just read it. They don't need you to read it. Whenever you talk, don't rush. Have spaces in between thoughts. That gives you a time to think about what you're going to say next. But most importantly, that gives the audience time to listen to what you said. Then they've got to roll it around in their mind. You've probably went over that speech 100 times, so you're trying to get through it pretty quick. They can't listen that fast. So speak a little slowly, but give some spaces in there. And those spaces, usually, we like to fill them in with and we like to do that because it kind of feels odd when you're standing in front of people and you do that. You don't say anything. But to the audience, it's very professional. It gives them an opportunity to listen and to think about what you just said. And then you go on to your next subject. And whenever you do a conclusion, don't just finish up and say, well, that's all I got, and then walk off, the platform. Let them know that you're winding the speech down. Say, and in conclusion, I'd like to reiterate the 4 different methods of eating right. And then whenever you finish, you can say, now is there any questions? And open the floor up to questions. This is another part of the lost art with verbal communication. Again, because we're always using our cell phones, and with pictures. So think about this whenever you're giving speeches. Think about using words accurately and describing the feelings behind some of the words, being a good storyteller.
We've talked about a lot of the differences we have with verbal communication, but make sure you read through the chapter, and at the end of the chapter you look at the power of words, how words influence thoughts and manage relationships, and also look at how to manage our misunderstandings, especially the use of the I language. Verbal communication, all the words that you speak, listen to, read, and write, make up the language content of your interpersonal communication. The words you choose to use and the words you choose not to use will determine the path of every conversation you have. And the path of the conversation takes you a little further along the journey of life because it's all connected. The old saying that sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me, it's not only a false statement, it also supports a frame of reference that encourages us to use words that can inflict pain, anger, shame, and guilt. Words can do and will do and destroy the soul of individuals far more quickly and severely than physical weapons. Physical wounds heal over time, but psychological, emotional, and spiritual words inflicted by negative, critical, or condemning words can drain, damage, and cripple individuals. Your verbal communication, however, can have the opposite effect if you choose. The verbal language you decide to use every day of your life can enlarge the lives of others, and you can choose the words that do not merely acknowledge others, but also communicate actual and accurate messages. You can make a positive difference in the lives of those whom you interact with by using good communication skills.